million that you approved last spring for the local share to offset $16.863 million of a total capital project. If the board chooses to go forward with this tonight, then we've identified December 13th as a target vote date, and this will continue to allow the district to address much needed renovations to the North Rose-Wolcott physical plant at a 0% tax rate increase to the taxpayer. That's critically important because I believe when you start to think about some of these things, we're really talking about if there's a critical failure here, we have to address it. If we have to address it, we know we're coming out of the general fund. There's a trade-off for addressing a critical area like this. That would be at 100% cost to the school district. At this time, going through using the capital reserve, we're looking at probably, I want to say anywhere from 80-20, 85-15, and Gary's going to elaborate on that a little bit further into the presentation because the actual return shows that our 80 ratio gets higher. And I want to err on the side of caution and say our typical aid for construction for capital projects is about 85-15. But if we tell you 80-20, that's a safe number. And then as Gary explained, the aid and the return on that aid actually increases from 85%. So leverage your capital reserve. You know, you're paying 15 cents on the dollar. If not, you're looking at potentially 100% and running an emergency project through the Board of Education approving that and then sending that on to see that. The danger, and this is the slide we're going to let Gary speak to, the danger in not leveraging the capital reserve towards your capital project is when things fail and we have to have an emergency project, state ed frowns upon that. They basically say that's poor planning on the part of the district, and that is a method that unfortunately was used for a long number of years in this particular district. We didn't address it until it absolutely failed, and then when it failed, we tried to push it through as an emergency project. So Gary, I'll let you speak to this slide a little bit.
Just one slide, so only an hour. No, thank you. So as Mr. Pullen said, we are able to use our capital reserves to leverage a big construction project. So and we get help from our financial advisors, fiscal advisors, who we met at the April 6th meeting. So they really help us determine how much capital reserve we need to present a project of $16 million, $16.8 million with zero tax impact on our residents. So it gets a little bit confusing talking about construction costs, which we've identified at 16.8, right? Because we finance these projects with capital reserve funds, but in large part with bonds, right? We start off with some short-term borrowing, and we use that until we know the state aid and the building aid is going to kick in, and we convert those bands, those bond anticipation notes, to bonds. And then we get our money, we get our, in this case, $4.25 million of reserves. We start using that reserve right up front as we start paying down our contractors, right? And the balance of our project is financed with that bond, and the bond issuance is anticipated at $12.6 million. And so that's our total financing. But our state aid will actually come in to cover the next 15 years of debt service. It'll pay off that $12 million, but there's interest attached to that, right? So we end up paying a little over $17 million over a 15-year period, or just under $1.2 million a year and it's completely offset by building aid, year by year. So the state likes to fund us year by year with the aid. They're not going to give us the entire money right up front. That would be, say, $3 million right now between principal and interest payments. We've got one bond dropping off in a couple of years, so that level of debt service will be dropping off. But we do have this project, so we can maintain a level budget from year to year. We won't anticipate a huge increase in our budget when we begin this project. So, one point I was going to make is our actual state aid over that 15 years is over $17 million, and it matches the debt service that we'll be paying out over that time frame. So does that make sense to everyone? Yes.
I have a question. I'm remembering that if we are doing work in each building, that can be beneficial to us in terms of the percentage that the state.
Right. That's another thing that fiscal guidance really helps us out with. We run into the possibility of running into limitations of how much we can spend in each building to maximize our building aid ratio. So they do take a look at that, and we discussed this the other day, and we are well below our cost allowances in each of those buildings. So we feel very comfortable going there.
Thank you. So I think that that's a great segue, is that, when we did discuss this with fiscal advisors, they felt very good about what we're proposing because, again, we're not getting to the max that we can borrow against each of the buildings and put out for a vote, and it really is saying, again, to meet that goal of a 0% tax rate increase to our community. What this all means for our public, is feedback that we got from the 2021 process as people anticipate a lot of good things happening immediately like they would have with their home. If we go to vote in December, it's about 14 months from a voter approval to actually swinging the first hammer and breaking ground. I think that that's critically important because, again, there are certain thresholds we have to meet with each of the respective state agencies, with the Board of Education, with our design and architectural team, with our construction managers. We really have to refine the scope of work. We really have to tease out and identify critical areas of the potential project, and then really send it all into state ed for review, and then receive feedback on, make revisions to our plans and our proposal based on what state ed does before they will issue any permitting and allow us to move forward. Then it goes out to bid, and then once the bids are awarded, we start putting the total envelope together and really start pushing to get things done. So that really, this I think, proposed timeline is critically important for our community to understand that from approval to groundbreaking is about 14 months. So again, just to reiterate, what's in front of the Board of Education tonight, part of the board meeting agenda, is two things. Number one, the board will approve moving forward with scheduling a committee vote on a project not to exceed $16.863 million. The second proposition that you have to approve tonight would be acknowledging the Type 2 seeker, which is essentially saying that we've done an environmental study, that the conclusion from our team is that there is no significant adverse impact on our environment and that there is no further action needed. Those are the two propositions that will be in front of the Board of Education tonight as part of the agenda. Back to where we started, this work began April 13th with a charge of saying, give us a proposed scope of what a project timeline could look like to whittle down that $96 million identified under the building condition survey, do something in a feasible manner that makes sense to our taxpayer, do something that's feasible for our community, that doesn't overwhelm us with constant construction, but also stretches our dollars to the fullest. So as part of that phased approach to whittling down the areas identified in building condition survey, you'll see a potential phase 2, which shows no site work done after the playground renovations at the elementary. Classroom renovations will continue to go on in the elementary, and now you're going to start to notice that our work is coming down to the first floor and addressing some of those areas. So phase 1 would be targeting the 1927 structure, phase 2 would go this way, and then we continue to modernize the academic spaces. Oops, excuse me. That was inadvertent. Once we address the surveys for the tennis court, I know that Ben and his team have plans to, come up with a practice field, weather permitting, out here for soccer and outdoor sports for our modified teams. Then, as part of Leavenworth, we would go ahead, finish the exhaust hood replacement, address the elevator, take the cab, all that work, and then really something that was taken out of the 2017 project would be to address the windows. And I'm going to reiterate something that was shared with us last week, that there's padding in the window replacement, again, because we're talking about 360 windows, which is the full envelope. We're talking about abatement conditions, we're talking about potential historical parks preservation issues with the window replacement, and we're talking about providing our students with the most energy efficient, and our buildings with the most energy efficient windows. And I know that number caught people by surprise to say it can't be, but yes, there is contingency in there. Yes, there is an escalator in there for inflation, supply chain issues, and abatement conditions. This is just a general flavor for what that could look like, not in detail, but in summary. And back to the high school, we'll continue to, address the generator, tackle those roofs, and then down in our technology wing, really think about replacing that dust collector, and that would be $3.32 million under potential phase 2. Now, also under phase 2, you know that one of the things that the Board of Education had me study last year was potential for moving everything to electric buses, starting as soon as 2027 and to be completed by 2035. What we've identified through our work together is that our transportation center, currently where it exists on the North Rose-Wolcott Elementary campus, is A, no longer adequate for any bus, B, not equipped to handle the amount of electric charging stations that we have, and C, really a hazard when it comes to students, cars, and buses sharing the same place. And we've thought about a joint operations center where maintenance and operations and transportation would work together and become one as a way to be a little bit more efficient with our services and a little bit more user-friendly, as Buchanan Road would allow for us to travel, west, east, and north in a quick hurry, and then be right around the corner from heading south. This would also provide us with an opportunity to modernize and meet the state's mandates for electrification of school buses and put us in a brand new facility equipped with locker rooms, a conference room, more office space, and just really try to realize some efficiencies. And again, this is just the potential item that could be addressed under phase 2. That, as you see, will be a significant investment on the part of the community, but one that I think is really going to be mandated by the state. So the other part, possible third phase, and again, I would go back and say, under possible phase 2, we targeted a potential for a 2024 vote. There's nothing set in stone. We don't have any plan as of right now to move on that, but it just shows that if we replenish our capital reserves to the tune that we could keep that 0% tax rate increase, that's what as early as we'd be ready to go this next winter. Phase 3, the following year, we would go through and tighten up some more of our work. That would entail demolishing the bus garage, redesigning the parking lot, finishing up with window replacement at the elementary, finishing up finish for classrooms down at the elementary, $5 million approximately to do all of that. And by that point in time, again, you've got a fully restored elementary campus. At Leavenworth, we're proposing under phase 3 that there is no additional work at this time. And again, for the high school, we're talking about science wing renovations, many which haven't been touched since probably the building was open. Some modern fit finish in there with sinks and countertops, but really we need to do full-blown renovations in there. And really, our class or our cafeteria space as it currently exists, you know, that's circa 1970. Our team in there, Rita and her crew, they do a fantastic job providing healthy and nutritious meals, but they really have to work hard not to enter into everyone else's space while they're doing that. And we think that we could do some things to alleviate the amount of heat that our cafeteria generates by relocating some of those things. So high school would be $5.8 million under that proposal. And again, under the 3-phased approach that the board basically asked me to put together, a hypothetical scenario would be under that 3-phased approach. You have a project total of $56,211,000, and you could create the timeline per the board prerogative that makes sense for the board and that our community can support, with the 0% tax rate increase being constant. The one piece that the board has to decide on this month would be, do you want to move forward with a 2023 proposed capital project vote in order for us to hit some timelines in terms of socializing the potential project to community, to advertise and meet what we're legally obligated to do, and then really start resting up and adding more pictures to the scope of work so that people who don't have access to the buildings on a regular basis can really see and identify, you know, what some of those items look like. We'll save them from the sanitation lines and the grease traps. They'll just have to take our word for that and that they need to be addressed. Here's another way to look at it. This is just specifically to the elementary building. The scope of work under a 3-phased approach would be that we would put $16 million worth of work into that structure. For Leavenworth, we would put $5.75 million into that structure. And for the high school, we would put $15.05 into that structure. And then here's the other piece, which would be the Joint Operations Center, $15 million. And I believe from a financial standpoint, if we take this approach, if the board chooses to act on one part of it versus another, we're really addressing areas of critical need. Because again, I believe that very intentionally, things were not addressed. I've seen that method used in the past where if we don't address it, we don't address it, we don't address it, when we come forward for a potential vote, how can people turn it down? I believe that project that really used that philosophy was voted down handily, and I don't know the year. I wasn't in the district at that point in time, but I do believe, as I said, for our opening school years, in 2023, our students should walk into a building with broken windows, and I believe as part of this project, people are starting to see aesthetically, we're putting them in an environment that we really believe the community can support. So I would be happy to invite Kara Gates from SEI and Gary Barno up to join me, and we'll entertain any questions the Board of Education may have at this time. And I know that there is a discussion portion as part of the regular agenda as well. Questions that we might be able to answer? Mr. Bogart?
I have a question about the swimming pool. How long would it take to do that? In other words, would our swim team have to relocate to fly or someplace else that has
Question. I do believe that any work we do structurally would require our pool going out of service. I don't want to comment on what that period of time would look like today, because I believe what I've seen from other things is once we get into some of that underbelly of the pool and structural modifications, I'd be negligent to say, oh, it's only going to be 3 months and, you know, we're going to close down in May and they'll be back in August. I can't give you a timeline, but I agree. Mr. Statsky?
So 16, 8, 30, whatever it is, would be our, that's the limit.
Yeah.
But inside there, if we decide, I mean, this is October of 23, when we get to really put the hands on, there's some things we can wiggle around, is that correct?
Yes.
But we're not locked into these exact proposals tonight. That's my question. Are we locked in?
Well, we've identified critical areas and we've identified contingency within those critical areas. Our scope would stay to that. But I honestly, just like we're doing right now with this project here, our target would be the areas we've identified. Yes, if we have money as the project unfolds, we would tackle a few more items as we go.
What locks us in scope-wise is the secret statement that you guys have. So we try to keep them general in the event that something pops up and we need to stay a little flexible. But that's the piece that determines what the scope is into these items and how they get pulled out.
So case in point would be what you saw in May didn't really include the sanitation lines being addressed right away. But what we dealt with in June and what we do quarterly warrants us changing and saying, we can't wait longer. We can wait on the septic system, which was identified in 2015 as having a 10-year life expectancy. But in 2020, when we ran into that first issue, we realized, no, you don't need to replace that at this point in time. We feel good about that, but the lines themselves need to be replaced. Any other questions? Mr. Bogart?
Mine is, has to do with the elementary school and the parent pickup. I don't know that you can assure us, but I would hope by the end of phase 3 and the bus garages, the present bus garage has disappeared, that we have an adequate way for parents, grandparents to pick up a child after school there. And let's say a handicapped parent. Right now, it's absolutely ridiculous. The parent has to, unless they changed it from last year, has to stay under the rain, snow, whatever, to pick up a child. But what I hope is that the engineers, the architects, come up with a plan after all said and done and the site work is done, that there will be a magnificent answer to that question.
Well, part of the program approach at the elementary, we studied last spring and there were modifications made. And we did say parents should not have to wait by the flagpole. Parents should not have to wait in the storm. Can I say with 100% certainty that doesn't still happen to some extent? I cannot. But I can say to you that parking lot on the west side of the elementary is dedicated toward parent pickup. And I do agree with you. We do have in our mind by the end of phase configuration entirely needs to change so that we don't run into those situations. But in the short term, as I've been given feedback, and I agree with it, the secure entrance really is in a poor location and really needs to be rethought. And we can continue to do some things like that. And we may look at whether it's a capital outlay or even grant funding for safety and security to repurpose that entirely and consider moving it toward the gym.
That would be the best, you know. Because even at the gym, that building is used on the weekends,
Yep.
and it's pretty open.
We've made changes to access for the internal part of the building on the weekends as well, but we understand what you're saying. Your concerns are the same ones we share. And we're staffing it differently. I mean, we really revisited that last year, and quite frankly, I know Ben can speak to this as well. There were conversations where when people are signing up for a 4-hour shift on the weekend, they can't just show up 10 minutes before the event starts, and they can't expect to walk out when the event concludes, that 4-hour shift really is, in all honesty, probably a 5-hour stint. And Gary and Ben have worked to address that.
Can I make a comment about the old part of North Rose Elementary, the 1927 version?
Sure.
Plus the whole thing. There was some discussion that with declining enrollment, we might not need the whole building. But having said that, I don't know how many, but there are many substandard size classrooms in that school. And that's not a good thing. And if we're redoing the building, I'm going to dare bet, I'm not an architect, an engineer, but I think you probably will, if you made them all the standard size, or maybe nicer, bigger, that you will have enough space used in that building. Not to even have a discussion about closing it.
Our intent would be to look at the total number of classroom spaces as they currently exist. And don't quote me on this, but when I was the principal of a very similar, if not identical building, 20 miles west of here, the square footage in those classrooms on the second, third floor, a little less than 600 square feet, 580, 588, I believe, state ed was for 700.
770 net, so not including any of your built-in casework, is what their threshold is for a primary classroom.
Right. So to that point, any renovations we make, we may lose classroom spaces and resolve the issue that you're mentioning at the same time. So you may consolidate what currently exists as 2 classrooms and have really one high-functioning, modernized classroom as part of our work.
So I think there's a correlation between classroom size being adequate versus what the teacher can adequately do with their classes.
Sure.
So if you have a really tiny classroom, the teacher can't do the activities that might be beneficial to the kids.
Sure.
So if anything, I would want a bigger classroom than Sandy, if I had my brothers.
Yeah. Any other questions, Mr. Statsky? Have your hand up again?
Yes, sir, I think from Gary, I can't, on the pie chart, read, I mean, you know, so, but, the 4250 is like 25% of the project. Okay, why did we choose that instead of like 20%? Or just kind of hedging our bet, we may not get 80% from the state?
No, that's where we consult with our fiscal advisor team, and they kind of back into what level of reserve support do we need to have a zero tax impact. So we've got a $16.8 million project. They determine, after they look at building bed building, building AV units, it gets a little more complicated, more than I can really speak to. But they determined with a zero tax impact, it's $4.2 million. And then we can finance that, the remaining $12 million over the 15 years.
Yeah, I don't know about this, but I was just a little curious why we knew it was 20%. stopped me from voting. It was just a curiosity. The numbers going out of my brain. That's,
Right, so, yeah, it is a little tricky, there's a couple ways to look at it. So what we're trying to do is show you, we have a building aid ratio of about 83.5% really right now. Now, they took a look at the scope of the project, and they're being conservative, just like Karen and her team does, and coming up with numbers, estimating from one year to the next. They're using an assumed interest rate right now, but they don't know what the actual interest rate is going to be when we go out and borrow, right? So there's a lot of conservatism built in. And they also anticipate that maybe not every item is going to be fully aidable. Is that fair to say? So this aid ratio of 80-20 is, they anticipate 97% of this project will be fully aidable at that aid rate of 83.5%. It shakes out that, 90% aidable amount of work will split out total aid, 80, just over 80%, 81% of the project will be covered with that aid. The rest will be covered with the reserve money.
Right. If we were doing a dollar-to-dollar comparison, I said to Gary the other day, before we met with Mike and Ben, I'm like, the numbers don't line up. We can stretch more because we have 4.25. It was the aid piece, and then factoring in that some items won't be aided at the appropriate rate to return. So again, we've heard that a pole barn or any additional work for a pole barn won't receive aid, right? And that's just stuff that we know we won't have aid on. There are certain items that the state's going to scrutinize and say, you're not using this for instructional purposes. The amount of aid you receive is less than what you would receive on instructional space renovations.
So we didn't really want to take that 4.25 million and say, oh, we're paying 4.25 with reserves, and the rest is just bonded. Because as I explained, that bond is really, it costs us money, right? But we get aided on that total debt service. So we're going to get total aid of 17. That's over the entire cost of the project, over 17 million. Yes.
and we've got the 4.25.
Yes, we do. So we, and I owe the board at least a fall dashboard report. I've been waiting for our auditors to come through with their final draft report. I expected it, this week. I still don't have it, so I was hoping to have the audit report by the 12th. It looks like it's going to be for the 26th, which is okay. But I know you're waiting on June report. Our treasurer likes to wait till we have a final audit report in place, so you haven't seen a treasurer's report or anything in a while.
Anyway, your content.
Yeah, so, the point I wanted to make is we're going to, the board authorized in June $2.5 million in, for the reserve. We're going to max that out. We're going to replenish all our reserves with everything that the board authorized. So there's 2.5 million, and last year we put 2.3 million in that reserve. So, and over the year we accrued some interest, earned some interest in that fund. So we have well over $4.8 million in that fund. Right now for this project, we're not using it all. We'll have a little bit for phase 2. And then when we close our books out this next year, hopefully we'll have some more. We can keep adding to it and carry on with the
I
plan.
understand. I really do. I understand.
Mr. Sloan?
At what point in that timeline do we get locked into our aid ratio? Is it the submission in 2024, or is it the initial vote tonight? I mean, I don't know. I'm just worried that for some reason it goes to a 70-30 because the state runs out of money. Is that going to throw a wrench into things? Or are we protected at some point throughout that timeline with an application to the state or an approval from the state?
I don't have a solid answer,
That's
but
okay.
I know our A ratio is not going to bounce around like that. It should stay pretty steady from year to year. I can follow up on that question and see how that A ratio does change over years and the factors that make it change.
And not necessarily how often does it change, just knowing at what point in the process do we get locked into X amount of A ratio, you know? So where they say that we aren't going to pay you 80-20 or we're going to pay you 85-15, and we know for sure that's where we're going to end up.
That's what our A ratio is exactly for this year. And I think we'll get locked into it when we actually do the borrowing.
That's my understanding of it, that fiscal advisors and the other firm that's their.
Yeah, it's their area.
Mike and Ben, honestly, I would say we can have them come back out later in the fall if you'd like. They felt very good about this project. They felt very good about where our numbers were. And again, we left money on the table because we're sticking with that goal of 0% tax rate increase to the district, the taxpayer. We wanted to go out and tackle $56 million. I don't think we could do that at 0%. I know confidently we can't do that at 0% tax rate increase to the community, but I also don't think that we would get the maximum aid return based on we have some debt service that has to continue to fall off. And we'll continue to use the state's mechanism structurally to benefit our taxpayers and capitalize on both.
One more thing, Ed, just to piggyback on what Paul said. Our resolution tonight is to lock, it's more geared towards the dollar amount for phase one, using the outline of identified areas that need more quick attention, per se.
Yes.
But it doesn't lock us into exactly that if something else arises, correct? Like, so, just for say, the roof fell in the elementary school, and in one part of the building that we weren't using, we can incorporate that into this capital project 3 months from now if we decide.
So under that scenario, forgive me for being literal, but under that scenario, we would run an emergency project.
Okay, so say, I'll get more to the point, $300,000 pole barn. If you find an alternative that's less money and
Then we budgeted $300,000 and we don't spend it.
well, say you budgeted $300,000 and you find an adequate alternative for $200,000.
Yep.
We can use $100,000 towards something else that might be in phase two.
In the areas and buildings specifically that we've identified in this proposition.
So that's a possibility.
To that point, yes. So again, we have a contingency fund for the 2021 project. We have the contingency, and if the project is going with a lot of intense scrutiny, as we get closer towards 75 to 80% completion, we'll look at what's remaining in those contingency funds and tackle some of these identified areas, whether it's boilers, whether it's roofs that are going to need some immediate attention for the drone footage with the infrared camera system, as long as in the two buildings being addressed by the 2021 vote, which are the North Rose-Wolcott High School and elementary. So to your point, yes, we do look at capitalizing on what voter authorization had. We go out with the voter authorization approval, hit those items, and then if the bids come back more favorable to the district, we look at utilizing those funds to tackle many other needs that, we've identified once the work begins.
And we are establishing as a ceiling of value, so the voters authorize, okay, so you guys are familiar with that part. We're not exceeding anything that we decide tonight dollar-wise. It's just, like Mike was saying, the margin opens up in between that ceiling and what everything ends up costing. You're able to buy more things, maybe even while you're contracting on site.
And just to speak to that, because I know, you know, what the community has experienced with what was promised in 2017 versus what was delivered, the team of SEI, BGA, and the district have really worked hard to create very methodical fail-safes with change orders and really manage that right before construction began. And I don't want to speak to the specifics, but I believe that there was a 10-day window before project started that they needed to write any change order from the contractor versus what the bid that was accepted was to what it is now. And then as things have gone through, we've identified a different scope of work. Certain change orders are written, but they're not written because the contractor is bringing them to us. In many cases, it's us identifying other areas and saying, if you've opened this up and I have an opportunity for shut-off valves in the ceiling, and I know that I can see with my eyes they're corroded and they need to be replaced, fix it while the ceiling's open. I know that wasn't in the scope of work, but I also know that I'd rather replace 10 valves while the ceiling's open than put up a brand new ceiling tile, pull that ceiling tile down, and get somebody on prevailing wage to come and labor on the bid. Jason?
One last thing. And we have, fiscal advisors has confirmed that all three buildings are eligible for the salary amount now.
Yep. And we're leaving a lot on the table that's still eligible, to the point where, I mean, honestly, I think both those guys were smiling when we got done talking to them about what our intent was. And you'll recall from Mike Visconti's presentations in the past, he's going to say you do or you don't have it. And that's really something that we've adhered to. Mr. Statsky?
When would we go up for the bonds? In this time?
We'd start borrowing July of 26.
Oh.
Because we would use the capital reserve money first. So stretch that money that we already have as far as we can before we borrow.
Okay. Yeah, thank you.
Mr. Bogart?
Yes, you know my question about windows. And I'm glad to hear that you said that that number up there can be much less than that. It depends on the looks and the construction and so on. But I had the question answered before that gas-filled windows have a lifespan of about 10 years, and they still give a good insulated value and help the building stay energy efficient. Does that then mean that every 10 years schools have to, not have to? Architects and engineers will say you must replace your windows.
No, I think what it does is there's a certain life expectancy that they're accustomed to from an industry standard. And we, as a school district, would identify through the building condition surveys what our priorities are. Now, for me, a 10-year life expectancy of a window might be worst case scenario, but we may say it's still insulated, it's not leaking, it's still aesthetically okay, and there's no real need to address it. It may be 15 to 20-year life expectancy. I'll liken it to the track. In 2000, when they installed the track, they said you have a 10 to 12-year life expectancy. We ran on that surface for 20 years. That's pushing it a little bit for that wear and tear. But for a building like this, it's climate controlled now. When we have an air conditioning unit and a chill beam system, we want that insulation, we want that efficiency, but we may not be pulling windows up and down, contributing to that deterioration. The caulk, all that might not be deteriorating as quickly because we're not opening up as quickly as possible. But again, every 5 years during the building condition survey, they're going to identify that. And I liken it to the septic tank at the high school. It was identified in 2015. this is what it needed to be replaced by 2025 at a 10-year life expectancy. At that point in time, 2015, they identified $650,000 to replace that septic tank. I would venture to guess that that's no longer able to be purchased for $650,000, but I also would say we don't need to do it because now quarterly we're going through with our contractor jetting the lines, flushing the tanks, continuing to try and maintain and preserve what we have to stretch the life expectancy. We will do that same thing with the windows.
Then you have the balance between how much fuel will $4 million buy.
Correct.
In other words, what's the balance point?
Correct.
The other question I have is, it has to do, and it wasn't mentioned on here, security
Yeah.
having to do with cameras. And,
So technology, we haven't done that because every year we put some stuff together for the state where we've identified a certain number of cameras as part of our annual operating budget. And then we would continue to utilize that. I believe this year, I think we purchased 35 more cameras.
Actually getting that number from Lisa now.
Yeah, I think we've targeted 35, so that we're going from analog completely to digital. But we're also going to continue, like the Smart School Safe Bond Act, and utilizing technology. And then some of our grant funding, we would continue to utilize those funds to offset what we don't have budgeted for in a capital project or our general fund.
I didn't realize there was another avenue to upgrade cameras and so on.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
good.
And I think to your point about the windows, I mean, this is the entire building,
Oh, yeah.
and this is a potential proposal. We may say in this particular building, we want to take a phased approach because we can't afford to chew up $4 million for abatement, window replacement, and all of that. But we have to figure that out, because what we did at the elementary, for all intents and purposes, we've had to relocate classrooms and staff into other areas. If you were to walk in there now, walk into the old gymnasium, old auditorium at North Rose Elementary, you're going to see several of the wall dividers where 8 or 10 of our service providers are housed in there in a cubby-like setup. And that was done intentionally so that they could give up their spaces, so students had spaces, and that we could continue to aggressively work with our contractors on window replacement with no interruptions. And our hope was, before the weather changes, we'll be weather tight. And I think right now, based on the progress we're making, we're doing really well with that. So this would hinder us to go all at once. We can't really move a lot of kids on this campus.
I have one other thing. On the elementary school, are you covering the whole building? I didn't see the southernmost 4, 5, 6, whatever classrooms being renovated. They weren't shaded. Maybe they were, I didn't know.
Okay.
On the elementary.
This is at the very end of the hallway, that
Yeah,
last
yeah.
addition that went on. They're not included in this presentation. I think likely because at the time of the BCS, they weren't identified as having a high priority, especially as the other spaces. So it's something that could come up at the next BCS. If you guys just have it in 2022, that happens in 2027. And again, to the point of the way that we try to write our seeker statements is flexible. So should you arrive at the juncture of phase 2 or phase 3, and those classrooms are not what they need to be in order to function programmatically for the students at that point, it can be part of the conversation, it can be introduced back into.
Well, and to piggyback on that point, so we're talking the module right here.
Yeah.
So just to piggyback on that point, you'll recall a couple years ago, the roof blew off. So we worked with our insurer and the roof over that. We also worked with our operating budget and our general fun, we painted several of those classrooms, if not all of those classrooms, correct, Ben? So we worked through that last spring, so there are some things where, you know, we can't find matching wall tile, subway tile, where a classroom door was replaced, but that area has all been painted. The ceilings have been replaced in the areas that took on water damage, and that environment from that set of double doors down, I believe, have all been painted either through Ben's team working on that or a contractor. I know hallway-wise we addressed it, and I believe those classrooms all, correct?
Yes.
So,
I have to correct myself on that borrowing. So I look at this chart in the bond anticipation note. We're going to be doing 2 bond anticipation notes. They're usually 1 year long. So on my debt service schedule, I've got our first principal and interest payments in 26-27, but the actual first borrowing will be in July of 25. It comes due July 27. There'll be a second borrowing that won't take us all the way into July of the next year. So our total principal and interest payments occur in 26-27, but we roll that bond over one time. So it's almost a 2-year short-term borrowing. So our initial borrowing is really July of 25. But what we do, as we said, we always do this, and it helps align our debt service payments with the state aid coming in. We use our capital reserve money first. We use all that up first. So as we report this multi-year project over years, we always report the expenditures being supported by the reserves first. That way, it helps match up the debt service spending with the aid that comes in.
Part of that's how SED structures when they start getting the impact rate, because that happens final cost over time, and later on in the process. Essentially, contractors start billing as soon as they start working, the state hasn't caught up at that point. So there's got to be some kind of holdover, some stopgap.
That's how those reserves come into play.
are there any other questions? Okay.
Thank you.
You want to take a short break before you get into the rest of your meeting? So we can raise the screen if anyone needs to use the restroom or anything of that nature?
We'll be fine.
Okay, very good.
Are we still? Yep.
Little things like that.
waiting here Tuesday night.
Well, a lot of it, like I said, is established.
I was just going to say, you represent a couple of brothers. It makes a difference. I think it makes a difference.
Thank you. All right, thank you very much. You want to move for growth? You sure?
Tina, is there anyone signed up for public access tonight?
No, there isn't.
Thank you. Okay, we move on to our agenda to number 4. You have your, which is the secret resolution. Is there a motion, please, to approve the secret resolution? Not the revolution, resolution. John and Linda. Discussion. Anyone? All right, hearing none. Tina, would you call the roll, please?
Cinda,
Yes?
Tina,
Yes.
John,
Yes?
Shelley is absent. Linda,
Yes.
Jason,
Yes.
Paul.
Yes.
Thank you, motion is carried.
Thank you. Motion is approved. Where are we? Here. Okay. On page 2B, the capital improvement proposition, which is for the phase 1. Is that not, Mr. Bowen? A motion, please, to approve. Tina, and a second. John? Discussion. I think we got our discussion questions answered earlier after the presentation.
But that's what I was going to add on. I think we've had a good discussion about the total needs over, actually not this year, but previous years, the needs of the district, and I think it's for the good of our district and the kids, their education.
Thank you, John. Anyone else? Paul?
Yeah, I think I agree with John here. I view this as an investment in the community too. Whether we have exactly the classroom, in the 1927 or whatever we're doing, but the community wants us building these buildings. We need to do the best we can to keep them in good shape for whatever purpose they are in 2040.
Anyone else? All right. Is this a roll call vote, Tina?
Yes.
Would you call the roll, please?
Cinda,
Yes?
Tina,
Yes.
John,
Yes?
Shelley is absent. Linda,
Yes.
Jason,
Yes.
Paul.
Yes.
Thank you, motion is carried.
Motion is approved. That completes our agenda tonight.
Mrs. Collier, before you conclude it, I'd just like to say something to the Board of Education. First and foremost, thank you for the directive and moving us forward. It's been very helpful for me. But primarily what I would like to say to all of you is, as of this afternoon, we are being told that our new bleacher system, minus the press box, will be completed tomorrow. That tomorrow morning we have our Department of Health inspection and our last fire inspection for our new concession stand, slated for 10 a.m. The weather is supposed to be terrible tomorrow, so I would advise advise that we do any type of ribbon cutting, because I don't know how we would for a concession stand or for our bleachers. But I would say to you, the board that worked on this 2021 project saw a grave need for improved facilities that are more accessible to our community with restrooms. You know, I believe we're going to hit the mark by making sure that our alumni come home and see a facility they've long deserved. So I just want to say thanks to the board for that, and say I appreciate your push, because I believe you're investing in our children's future in a lot of different ways. So you may not always hear that feedback, but I think tomorrow it's evident that you are putting your taxpayer dollars and your constituents, really their needs in mind whenever we make a decision. The facility itself is fantastic. There will be some adjustments made to the ramp and the stairs and the press box in November when the press box comes. But we've worked really hard to push those contractors to hit that mark. I think the concession stand itself is beautiful. We're really addressing an area of concern and need for a long time. And I think that, you know, you should all be very proud of your efforts and your work with that. So tomorrow night, again, I believe if we can get a group picture for the Board of Education, that would be wonderful. I'll have Tina put an email out to all of you to see who is available, but I would love to do that before the festivities begin. There are going to be fireworks tomorrow night, rain or shine. But again, we're making good gains, and I'd really like to compliment the men and women on this construction project to make that happen. There are several contractors that really turn their focus right to those high areas of visibility, knowing that homecoming is something pretty big for this community. And the point of view on those new bleachers really, I think, is going to make a remarkable difference for our spectators, and they're handicap accessible, which has been long overdue.
I think the Booster Club is going to be leading a big cheer. They're going to be very happy to have the facilities, and especially the restrooms. They're going to be used.
Yes, I've heard comments about restrooms too. Yeah.
For years.
All right. Well done. Thank you, board. We will entertain a motion for adjournment. Paul and Linda. Any discussion? All in favor? Motion is carried. We are adjourned.